All right, how about a look at New York City as we continue our week-long series highlighting the risks to major cities from sea level rise. It's home to more than 8 million people and one of the places that could see the biggest impacts as sea levels rise. All week here on the Weather Channel, we've been talking about how water can wipe out our history, its effects on the population, the impact to our country's military bases, and the dangers of hazardous materials on metropolitan areas.
Now, let's talk about how rising seas will affect your wallet. Property values are at risk. In New York City alone, the tax assessor says property is valued at more than $1 trillion. This 3D view shows what the city could look like with an 8-foot water rise. Whole portions of the shore underwater. Skyscrapers fronting waterways instead of roadways, looking a bit like Venice, Italy.
In terms of what to expect and when, the latest studies project more than 2-foot water rise by the year 2070, and that kind of increase would pack quite a punch. At high tide, with that 2-foot plus rise, nearly 5,900 homes would see flooding. More than 2,600 acres of land would be swamped, including 24 hazardous waste sites and 2 hospitals. New York City has a lot to lose. Daren Blomquist is the Senior Vice President at ATTOM Data Solutions, a firm that looks at risks cities face when it comes to climate change. And Daren, New York, we know, has some of the most expensive property on the planet. What would this mean for those property values?
Well, it's not good news for those property values, but the thing is, I mean, we show nationwide there's 5.5 million residential properties, just looking at residential, not including commercial, that are in these high-risk flood zones, and combined market value of those properties is $1.7 trillion. That's just in the very highest risk flood zones across the country and just residential properties. It's about 5% of the total residential market that we're talking about. And obviously, yes, if you have that flood damage, and we saw it to a certain extent in New York with Sandy, that can have a devastating effect on home values. There's properties there still that were hit by Sandy that weren't covered by insurance or weren't properly covered by insurance that are still lingering and have gone into foreclosure and are bringing down the overall values of those neighborhoods.
All right, now let's talk the cost of flood insurance. You just mentioned that. As premiums rise, will property values continue to drop?
Well, we haven't seen that yet. I mean, counterintuitively, we're seeing home prices, home values in the highest risk flood zones still going up, at least over the last 5 years. Now, we haven't seen the insurance rates go up too much. There was a shock to the system back in 2012 when Congress passed legislation taking out the subsidies behind the flood insurance that's supported by FEMA. And when we saw that, we saw a big backlash from the real estate industry as well as consumers when they saw those bills. So I think if those subsidies are removed, I mean, you talked about going from hundreds of dollars a year in flood insurance to tens of thousands of dollars a year in some cases, and that is going to have an impact on property values. We have not seen that yet, but we also haven't really seen those subsidies removed from flood insurance.
All right, Daren Blomquist, thank you so much for your time. We certainly appreciate it, your insight.